The dashboard clock read 2:17 a.m. when Officer Thomas Reid radioed in his final status update from Unit 47. His voice betrayed nothing unusual, just the practiced monotony of a routine patrol through Millbrook's northern district. The late October rain tapped against the roof of the Crown Victoria, creating a hypnotic rhythm that had likely accompanied Reid and his partner, Officer Valerie Keller, for most of their graveyard shift. Unit 47 completing circuit on Tanner Road, that all quiet. Heading back toward Main Street, dispatch acknowledged with equal nonchalance the copy that Unit 47. Neither Reid nor the dispatcher could have known those mundane words would be scrutinized by investigators, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts for decades to come. Neither could have imagined those words would be the last official record of two police officers who would simply disappear. Millbrook, Pennsylvania, population 17,834 in 1993, was the kind of town that took pride in its ordinariness. Nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, it was a place where most residents left their doors unlocked at night. The police blotter typically consisted of parking violations, noise complaints, and the occasional drunk and disorderly. The town had experienced exactly 3 homicides in the preceding decade, all domestic disputes with clear perpetrators who were promptly arrested. Which is why what happened next defied explanation. At 5:30 a.m., when Reid and Keller failed to return to the station at the end of their shift, Sergeant Howard Phillips initially assumed they were handling a last-minute call. By 5:45, with no radio contact, Phillips dispatched another unit to locate them. Officer James Nelson found Unit 47 at 6:07 a.m., parked at a precise angle against the curb on Rosemont Drive, a quiet residential street 6 blocks from where Reid had made his final radio contact. The vehicle's engine was off. The headlights were off. The doors were locked. The keys were in the ignition. But Reid and Keller were gone. What Officer Nelson reported next would form the foundation of one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in Pennsylvania history. Inside the patrol car, everything appeared normal at first glance. 2 half-empty coffee cups rested in the cup holders. The radio was tuned to the department's frequency. The officers' notepads were open on the dashboard, with Reid's displaying a partial license plate number, JLK74. The last digit was missing, as if Reid had been interrupted mid-documentation. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no bullet holes or broken glass. Even the officers' service weapons remained holstered and secured in the vehicle. The only detail that struck Nelson as immediately odd was that both front doors were locked from the inside. It was like they just evaporated, Nelson would later tell investigators. Like they'd been plucked right out of the car by something that didn't disturb a single hair on their heads. Within hours, the Millbrook Police Department had mobilized every available officer. By noon, state police had joined the search. Dogs traced the officers' scents to the edge of the patrol car and no further. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned the surrounding forests. Divers checked the nearby Stanton River, but nothing. As Detective Michael Harding, the lead investigator assigned to the case, summarized in his initial report, "We are facing a situation without precedent in department history. 2 armed, trained officers have vanished from a locked vehicle without apparent cause or evidence of their current whereabouts." The community response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of volunteers combed the woods and fields surrounding Millbrook. Local businesses donated supplies to search teams and put up reward posters. The local newspaper, the Millbrook Chronicle, ran daily updates on the front page, faded with each passing day. Thomas Reid was 29, a 5-year veteran of the force. Recently engaged to his high school sweetheart, Laura Bennett, he had just put a down payment on a small ranch house on the outskirts of town. Described by colleagues as methodical and by the book, Reid had received commendations for his attention to detail in evidence collection. His service record was spotless. Valerie Keller, 34, had transferred to Millbrook 3 years earlier from the Philadelphia Police Department, seeking a quieter environment to raise her 7-year-old daughter, Madison. A single mother who had lost her husband to cancer, Keller was regarded as tough but fair, with a particular talent for de-escalating tense situations. She volunteered with the department's community outreach program, teaching self-defense classes to women. Their families appeared on local television, pleading for information. Laura Bennett, clutching the engagement ring Reid had given her 2 months earlier, stared into the camera with red-rimmed eyes. Tommy wouldn't just leave. Something happened to them. Someone knows something. Please. Madison Keller, too young to fully comprehend, asked when her mother was coming home. The investigation quickly exhausted conventional possibilities. Neither officer had significant debts or known enemies. Their bank accounts remained untouched. Their passports were found in their respective homes. There were no indications of disciplinary issues within the department or involvement with internal affairs. But Detective Harding explored every angle, including the possibility that Reid and Keller had orchestrated their own disappearances. It makes no sense, he told his team during a briefing 1 week into the investigation. People don't vanish without taking money, without taking clothes, without saying goodbye to their loved ones. And they certainly don't do it while on duty, from a locked police car, leaving their weapons behind. The most promising early lead came from Eleanor Winters, an elderly insomniac who lived on Rosemont Drive. She reported seeing headlights pull up outside her house sometime after 2:30 a.m. Curious, she had parted her curtains and observed what she believed was a police car parking across the street. "I saw 2 people inside," she told investigators. They seemed to be looking at something between them. Then there was a flash of light from inside the car, very bright, like lightning. I thought maybe it was their computer screen or someone taking a photograph. I went to get my glasses for a better look, but when I came back to the window, the car was still there, but I couldn't see anyone inside anymore. Mrs. Winters' testimony was considered credible but inconclusive. The flash of light could have been anything from headlights of a passing vehicle to the reflection of Reid or Keller checking their flashlights. The case took its first bizarre turn 3 weeks after the disappearance, when a routine canvass of businesses along Main Street yielded unexpected footage. The security camera from First National Bank had captured Unit 47 driving past at 2:23 a.m. 6 minutes after Reid's final radio check-in. But the patrol car wasn't alone. Following approximately 30 feet behind was a dark-colored van with no visible license plate. The grainy black and white footage made identification of the vehicle's make and model impossible, but its presence raised immediate questions. Why would an unmarked van be following a police car at that hour? And why hadn't Reid or Keller reported it? The discovery prompted Detective Harding to revisit the partial license plate in Reid's notepad. Was JRK74 the beginning of the van's plate number? Had the officers noticed they were being followed and begun documenting it? A statewide search for vehicles with license plates beginning with those characters yielded over 200 potential matches. Each was investigated. None provided viable leads. 2 months into the investigation, with resources stretched thin and no substantive progress, pressure mounted on the Millbrook Police Department. The FBI officially joined the case, bringing additional manpower and expertise, but even they found themselves stymied by the fundamental question that haunted the investigation. How does one extract 2 police officers from a locked vehicle without leaving evidence? The theory that gained the most traction within the department was that Reid and Keller had observed something, perhaps illegal activity involving the van, and had willingly exited their vehicle to investigate. This would explain why they had locked the car, securing their weapons inside as they perhaps approached what they believed was a routine traffic stop or suspicious vehicle. But this theory had critical flaws. It didn't explain why they hadn't radioed in their location or the reason for the stop. It didn't explain why no one had seen or heard anything on a residential street. And it certainly didn't explain why 2 experienced officers would approach a suspicious vehicle without their service weapons, especially in the middle of the night. As Detective Harding noted in his growing file, either we are missing something fundamental, or the explanation lies beyond conventional criminal behavior. The case broke open, or rather, spiraled deeper into mystery in April 1994, 6 months after the disappearances, when a hunter found Officer Valerie Keller's badge in the woods approximately 12 miles north of Millbrook. The badge was intact, showing no signs of damage or exposure to the elements, despite having supposedly been in the forest through a harsh Pennsylvania winter. It was found resting on a fallen log, as if deliberately placed there for discovery. An intensive search of the surrounding area revealed nothing else. No clothing, no weapon, no signs of disturbance or struggle. Just a single badge, polished and pristine, left like a calling card. Or a taunt. Dios. Want. On to. The discovery reinvigorated public interest in the case, but for investigators, it only deepened the confusion. Why Keller's badge and not Reid's? Why that location? And most troublingly, why did the badge appear to have been recently placed, rather than having weathered months in the forest? FBI behavioral analysts suggested the badge placement indicated a perpetrator who was monitoring the investigation and wanted to manipulate its direction, someone playing a game with authorities. This raised the disturbing possibility that Reid and Keller had been targeted specifically because they were police officers, perhaps by someone with a vendetta against law enforcement. For Laura Bennett and Madison Keller, the discovery brought renewed hope that their loved ones might still be alive somewhere. For Detective Harding, it brought renewed determination but also frustration. Someone knows exactly what happened, he told reporters at a press conference. Someone has answers, and we will find them. But the months continued to pass without significant developments. The FBI scaled back its involvement, but the case remained active but increasingly cold. On the one-year anniversary of the disappearances, the Millbrook Chronicle ran a retrospective piece featuring interviews with family members, fellow officers, and community leaders. The headline read, 365 days, no answers, the Reid-Keller mystery continues. In it, Police Chief Robert Davidson made a solemn promise: this department will never stop looking for Tom and Val. Never. Never. By 1995, the Reid-Keller case had begun to attract attention beyond Millbrook. True crime magazines published speculative articles. A television show specializing in unsolved mysteries featured a segment recreating the night of October 23, 1993, generating dozens of tips, all of which led nowhere. The most persistent theory among amateur sleuths involved a conspiracy within the Millbrook Police Department itself. Opponents pointed to the lack of radio communication, the secluded location where the patrol car was found, and the pristine condition of Keller's badge as evidence of an inside job. They suggested Reid and Keller had discovered corruption within the department and were silenced. Detective Harding and Chief Davidson vehemently rejected these theories, pointing out that no evidence of departmental corruption had ever been uncovered. Despite thorough internal and external investigations prompted by the disappearances. In 1997, a potential breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source. A man arrested for armed robbery in Pittsburgh claimed to have information about the missing officers. In exchange for reduced charges, Dennis Mercer told investigators he had been part of a drug trafficking organization operating in western Pennsylvania in the early 1990s. According to Mercer, one of his associates had bragged about taking care of a couple of nosy cops near Millbrook. This associate, whom Mercer identified as Victor Paley, had allegedly described forcing a police car off the road and making sure those cops would never be found. Paley, however, had died in a shootout with police in 1995, taking whatever secrets he might have possessed to his grave. Investigators found no concrete evidence linking him to the Reid-Keller case, and inconsistencies in Mercer's story eventually led them to dismiss his claims as an opportunistic attempt to negotiate a better plea deal. The investigation continued its slow fade into the background of Millbrook's consciousness. Detective Harding retired in 2001, handing the case to younger detectives who approached it with diligence but without his personal connection. Laura Bennett eventually moved away from Millbrook, unable to bear the constant reminders of her lost future. Madison Keller grew up, graduated high school and left for college, carrying only fading memories of her mother. By the 10th anniversary in 2003, the annual press conferences had dwindled to brief statements from the department spokesperson. The files, once prominent on detectives' desks, were archived but never closed. Millbrook slowly transformed, as small towns do. The main street saw businesses come and go. The police department moved to a new building in 2007, with a memorial plaque honoring Reid and Keller mounted in the lobby. Their faces smiled from photographs frozen in 1993, while the world continued changing around them. The case might have remained forever in that limbo between unsolved and forgotten, if not for what happened in early 2024. Officer Diana Powell, newly transferred to Millbrook from Pittsburgh, developed an interest in the department's most famous cold case. In reviewing the files during her off hours with permission from her superiors, she noticed something that countless investigators before her had somehow overlooked. In the original evidence logs from Unit 47, there was a notation about the patrol car's mileage on the night of the disappearance. When the vehicle was found on Rosemont Drive, its odometer read 78,413 miles, but the maintenance records from the day before showed the car at 78,389 miles, the 24 miles unaccounted for. Reid's final radio check-in had placed Unit 47 on Tanner Road, approximately 2 miles from where the patrol car was ultimately found. Even if the officers had driven directly to Rosemont Drive after that communication, the mileage discrepancy suggested they had traveled an additional 22 miles that night, miles that had never been investigated because no one had noticed the inconsistency. They went somewhere else that night, Powell told Lieutenant Jason Keating, who now oversaw the department's cold cases, somewhere that took them on a 40-minute round trip, assuming normal driving speeds. This revelation prompted the first serious reinvestigation of the case in years. Where had Reid and Keller gone during those unaccounted-for miles? And why had they returned to Millbrook afterward, only to vanish from their patrol car? Using the original files, Powell and Keating constructed a timeline. Reid's last radio check-in was at 2:17 a.m. The bank's security camera captured Unit 47 and the mysterious van at 2:23 a.m. Based on the mileage discrepancy, the officers would have returned to Millbrook and parked on Rosemont Drive somewhere between 3 and 3:15 a.m., but depending on their average speed and any stops they might have made. This matched Eleanor Winter's statement about seeing the police car park sometime after 2:30 a.m., followed by the strange flash of light. Working with this new timeline, investigators began exploring what might have drawn the officers so far from their patrol route in the middle of the night. The 24-mile radius around Millbrook encompassed several smaller towns, vast stretches of forest, abandoned industrial sites, and the interstate highway. In May 2024, Powell and Keating decided to re-interview everyone still living in the area who had been questioned during the original investigation. Most had nothing new to offer. Some had moved away or passed away in the intervening decades. A few recalled details they hadn't mentioned before, but nothing that significantly advanced the case, until they reached Frank Novak. In 1993, Novak had been a gas station attendant working the night shift at Colton's Fill-Go, a now defunct service station that had once operated on the outskirts of Millbrook. His name appeared in the original case files as having been interviewed and reporting nothing unusual on the night of October 23rd. Novak, now in his 60s and working as a janitor at the local high school, initially seemed confused when Powell and Keating mentioned the Reid-Keller case. "Yeah, I remember when those cops went missing. Scary stuff. But I don't know anything about it. Just what I read in the papers." When reminded that he had been interviewed in 1993, Novak furrowed his brow. "Oh, right. They asked if I saw a patrol car that night. I told them no." "And was that accurate, Mr. Novak?" Powell asked. "Did you see anything unusual during your shift?" Novak hesitated. "Look, I already told the detective back then. I didn't see nothing." But his body language, the way he avoided eye contact, the nervous tapping of his fingers on the table suggested otherwise. Keating leaned forward. "Mr. Novak, it's been over 30 years. Whatever you might have been afraid to say then, you can tell us now. This might be the last chance anyone has to find out what happened to those officers." Novak's resistance crumbled visibly. "I lied," he finally admitted. I saw them that night. The police car pulled in around 2:30, maybe 2:35. The male officer came inside, asked if he could use the phone. Said their radio was acting up. Powell and Keating exchanged glances. This was entirely new information. Never did Officer Reid say who he was calling, but Keating asked. No, but he looked worried. Kept looking back at the car where his partner was waiting. He made the call, talked for maybe a minute, then thanked me and left. They drove off toward Route 79. Why didn't you tell this to investigators in 1993, Mr. Novak? Novak's face flushed. Because there was a van, a dark blue Dodge Ram van. It pulled in right after the police car left. 2 men inside. They asked if I'd seen a patrol car. I said yes, told them which way it went. They thanked me and followed after it. He paused, swallowing hard. The next morning when I heard those officers were missing, I put it together. Those men in the van, they were following the cops. And I told them where to go. What did these men look like? Powell pressed. One was tall, thin. The other was shorter, stockier. Both white guys, maybe in their 30s or 40s. They were wearing dark clothes. Baseball caps. The tall one did the talking. And why didn't you come forward with this information? Novak looked down at his hands. They came back. 3 days after the cops disappeared. Same van. They reminded me I'd been helpful to them. Said it would be best for everyone if I stayed that way. Said they knew where I lived, knew about my wife and kids. He shook his head. I was scared. I had a family. So I lied when the detective came around asking questions. Said I hadn't seen anything. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. For the first time in decades, there was a verified sighting of Reid and Keller after their last radio check-in and confirmation that they were being followed by the van seen in the bank's security footage. More importantly, there was now a clear direction. Whatever had happened to the officers had its origins along Route 79, which led north from Millbrook toward the more remote parts of the county. Working with Novak's information and the mileage discrepancy, and investigators calculated that Reid and Keller could have driven approximately 12 miles up Route 79 before turning back to Millbrook. This area included an abandoned limestone quarry, several hunting cabins, and a small research facility owned by Omnitech Industries, a defense contractor that had shut down operations in the region in the early 2000s. Each of these locations was methodically re-examined. The quarry, which had been searched during the initial investigation, was now partially flooded, making a thorough examination impossible without specialized equipment. The hunting cabins, most of which had changed ownership multiple times since 1993, yielded nothing suspicious. The Omnitech facility, however, presented a challenge. The original case files contained no record of investigators visiting the site in 1993 or in any subsequent review of the case. When Powell inquired why, she discovered that the facility had been considered outside the search radius based on Reid's final radio check-in, but with the new timeline and mileage information, it fell precisely within the area where the officers might have traveled. Current county records showed the property had been purchased by a private investor after Omnitech's departure and remained vacant, classified as industrial real estate awaiting redevelopment. On June 15, 2024, Powell and Keating, accompanied by a team of officers and forensic specialists, arrived at the former Omnitech facility with a search warrant. The main building, a low, sprawling structure surrounded by chain-link fence, had clearly been abandoned for years. Vegetation had reclaimed much of the parking lot. The windows were boarded up or broken. Graffiti covered sections of the exterior walls. Inside, the team found what one would expect in an abandoned industrial building: empty offices, debris, evidence of occasional trespassers and wildlife. The manufacturing areas had been stripped of equipment, leaving vast, empty spaces with concrete floors and high ceilings. It seemed like another dead end until Officer Powell noticed something unusual about the facility's security booth near the main gate. Unlike the rest of the building, the small gatehouse appeared to have been maintained to some degree. The door, while weathered, had a relatively new padlock. The single window was intact and covered from the inside with what looked like black material. When the team broke the padlock and entered the booth, they found a space that had clearly been used much more recently than the rest of the facility. There was a folding chair, a battery-powered lamp, and a small table. On the wall hung a map of Millbrook with various locations marked, including the police station and Rosemont Drive where Unit 47 had been found. But the most disturbing discovery was in a metal box beneath the table, Polaroid photographs, dozens of them, documenting what appeared to be surveillance of both Thomas Reid and Valerie Keller in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. The officers at home, at restaurants, on patrol. Some photos showed Laura Bennett and Madison Keller as well. And at the bottom of the box, separated from the others, was a final photograph, one that would forever change the nature of the investigation. It showed the interior of a police car at night, illuminated by a strange bluish light that seemed to emanate from between the front seats. The image was blurry, as if the camera had been shaking, but two figures were clearly visible, Reid and Keller, their faces frozen in expressions of shock or fear, their hands raised as if to shield themselves from whatever was producing that unearthly glow. On the back of the photograph, written in faded blue ink, were the words, "The moment of transition, 10/23/93. Subjects Reid and Keller. Trial 7. Success." Lieutenant Keating stared at the photograph, then at Powell. "What the hell does transition mean? And Trial 7. There were others?" Powell didn't answer immediately. She was examining the map on the wall more closely, noticing that beyond the markings in Millbrook, there were other locations highlighted in surrounding counties. Some had dates next to them, dating back to the late 1980s. Others had initials. 2 locations in rural areas similar to where Keller's badge had been found were marked simply with question marks. "Sir," she said finally, "I don't think this was just about Reid and Keller. I think they were part of something bigger, something that started before them and continued after." As the forensic team catalogued the contents of the gatehouse, a senior technician called Powell and Keating outside. He'd been examining the ground around the security booth and had noticed unusual depressions in the soil, rectangular areas where the vegetation grew differently than in surrounding areas. "It could be nothing," he told them. "But in my experience, disturbed soil patterns like these are consistent with something being buried and then exhumed later." The implications sent a chill through everyone present. Had the officers been brought here that night? Had they been buried on the property, only to be moved later? Or were these traces of earlier victims, perhaps the preceding trials referenced in the photograph? As the sun began to set over the abandoned Omnitech facility, casting long shadows across the overgrown parking lot, and the investigation team realized they had stumbled upon something far more complex than a simple disappearance or murder. The discovery of the surveillance photographs and the cryptic notation about transition and trials suggested an organized operation with multiple participants, extensive planning, and possibly multiple victims. The reference to success implied that whatever had happened to Reid and Keller had achieved its intended outcome. But what was that outcome? And who was behind it? As Powell secured the final evidence bag containing the Polaroids, she glanced up at Keating. "Sir, there's something else. The photo with that strange light, it matches what Eleanor Winters described seeing from her window that night, then the flash from inside the patrol car." Keating nodded slowly. "We need to find out exactly what Omnitech was working on at this facility in the early 90s. And we need to identify every person associated with its operations." The implications were clear. Whatever had happened to officers Thomas Reid and Valerie Keller in October 1993 had been methodically planned, carefully executed, and deliberately concealed for over 30 years. And if the discovery at the gatehouse was any indication, they hadn't been the only victims. As night fell and additional resources were called in to begin what promised to be a massive excavation of the property, and Lieutenant Keating made a phone call to the current police chief, Margaret Reynolds. "Chief, we found something at the old Omnitech place. Something big. I think we need to reopen every missing persons case within a 100-mile radius going back to at least 1985. And we need to find out everything we can about what Omnitech was really doing out here. On the other end of the line, Reynolds listened in stunned silence before asking the question that would guide the next phase of the investigation. Do you think they are still alive? Keating looked across the darkening parking lot to where Powell was supervising the security of the scene, her face illuminated by the harsh blue lights of police vehicles, lights eerily similar to the glow captured in that final Polaroid. I don't know, he admitted. But whatever happened to them, whatever transition means, I don't think it ended that night in 1993. I think it's been continuing all this time. And I think we have just scratched the surface. As additional units arrived to secure the Omnitech facility, no one noticed the dark blue van parked on a service road half a mile away, or its occupant watching the police activity through high-powered binoculars. No one saw him reach for a phone and dial a number that hadn't changed in 3 decades. And no one heard his 5-word message to the person who answered. They found the gatehouse. Proceed. Proceed. My no, chin. The Reid Keller investigation, dormant for so long, had awakened. But so too had the forces that had orchestrated the officer's disappearance. And this time they were watching. The excavation of the Omnitech facility grounds began at dawn on June 16, 2024. As the morning fog lifted over the abandoned industrial complex, a procession of vehicles carrying forensic specialists, cadaver dogs, and ground-penetrating radar equipment made their way up the gravel access road. State police had established a perimeter overnight, and news helicopters hovered at the legal minimum distance, but capturing aerial footage of what had suddenly become the center of the most significant cold case development in Pennsylvania in decades. Lieutenant Jason Keating hadn't slept. After securing the scene and establishing a command post in a trailer brought to the site, he had spent the night reviewing everything they knew about Omnitech Industries, which wasn't much. Founded in 1982 as a defense subcontractor specializing in communications technology, the company had operated facilities in 6 states before abruptly downsizing in 2002 and eventually being acquired by a larger conglomerate. The Millbrook facility had officially been used for research and limited production of specialized communications equipment according to county records. Nothing in the public documentation suggested anything sinister or extraordinary about the company's operations. But as Keating was quickly learning, public records told only a fraction of the story. At 8:17 a.m., the first cadaver dog alerted its handler to an area approximately 50 yards behind the main building, near what appeared to have been a loading dock. The ground-penetrating radar confirmed an anomaly consistent with disturbed soil, and the excavation team moved in. What they uncovered was not a body, but a metal container roughly the size of a footlocker, buried 3 feet down. The container was sealed with both a padlock and what appeared to be an electronic locking mechanism, now inactive due to power loss. When the container was finally opened at 10:43 a.m., its contents caused even the most seasoned investigators to fall silent. Inside were neatly organized files, each bearing the Omnitech logo alongside a classification marking, Threshold, Level 4 clearance only. The files contained photographs, data printouts, medical records, and handwritten notes documenting what appeared to be a series of experiments. Each file was labeled with a case number and what looked like a subject identifier. One file was labeled TRVK93. Officer Diana Powell, who had been overseeing the cataloging of evidence from the gatehouse, was called over to examine the discovery. As she opened the TRVK93 file, her hands trembled slightly. Thomas Reid and Valerie Keller, she murmured, scanning the first page. They were designated as trial subjects 42 and 43. The file contained detailed biographical information on both officers, far beyond what would be available in public records. On medical histories, psychological profiles, daily routines, and personal relationships were documented with clinical precision. Attached were the same surveillance photographs they had discovered in the gatehouse, along with dozens more showing the officers in situations they'd never found in the initial collection. But it was the technical documentation that proved most disturbing and most baffling. Pages of equations, diagrams of devices that resembled nothing in conventional technology, and repeated references to something called the Threshold Protocol. What the hell were they doing here? Keating asked, examining a diagram that depicted what looked like waves emanating from a central device toward a human silhouette. Powell shook her head, turning pages. Whatever it was, they'd been planning it for months. Look at these observation notes. They were watching Reid and Keller since at least May 1993, testing their reactions to stress, documenting their physical condition, selecting them, Keating said grimly. And the discovery of the buried container transformed the investigation. What had begun as a renewed inquiry into a cold case was rapidly evolving into something unprecedented, an investigation into what appeared to be unauthorized human experimentation conducted by a defense contractor. By noon, the FBI had been notified, and agents with specialized backgrounds in scientific research and corporate crime were en route to Millbrook. Chief Reynolds had contacted the district attorney's office to secure expanded warrants covering any and all former Omnitech properties or storage facilities within the state. Meanwhile, the excavation continued. Throughout the day, 3 more burial sites were identified and examined. Each contained similar metal containers, though the contents varied. One held electronic equipment that the forensic technicians couldn't immediately identify. But another contained vials of what appeared to be blood and tissue samples, carefully preserved. The third held only a single item, a leather-bound journal with no name on the cover. When opened, the journal revealed itself to be the personal records of someone identified only as Project Lead. The entries began in 1987 and continued through 1994, documenting the writer's involvement with something called Project Threshold. The final entry, dated February 17, 1994, approximately 4 months after Reid and Keller disappeared, consisted of just 3 sentences. Transition integrity maintained at 97% for 120 days. Subjects show minimal degradation, but shutdown procedures initiated as per Protocol 17. As the day progressed, media attention intensified, and reporters gathered at the perimeter established by state police, and speculation ran wild. The Millbrook Chronicle ran an online headline, "Major Development in Reid-Keller Case. Police Excavating Abandoned Research Facility." Laura Bennett, now Laura McKinney after remarrying in 2001, was notified by department liaison officers at her home in Colorado. Madison Keller, now Madison Wilson, a psychology professor at Penn State, drove immediately to Millbrook upon receiving the news. By nightfall, the excavation had yielded a total of 7 buried containers, likely each with contents related to what was increasingly being referred to as an unauthorized research program. But no human remains had been found, fueling speculation about what had truly happened to the missing officers. At 9:45 p.m., while reviewing the contents of the journal, Powell made a discovery that would reshape the entire investigation. "Listen to this entry from August 1993, she told Keating, reading from the journal. Subject selection for Trial 7 complete. Law enforcement candidates identified as optimal due to physical conditioning and alertness profiles. Monitoring phase initiated. Field location gamma prepared for equipment installation." Powell looked up. Field location gamma, that has to be the site where they actually conducted whatever they did to Reid and Keller. "It's not here. This was just for planning and monitoring." Keating leaned over to examine the journal. "Is there any indication where this field location gamma might be?" Powell flipped through pages. "Nothing explicit. No, but there are references to distance requirements between monitoring stations and field locations. According to this, gamma was approximately 18 miles from the primary observation post, 18 miles from the Omnitech facility, within the radius suggested by the patrol car's unexplained mileage. Working through the night, the investigation team used the distance parameter to identify possible locations that matched field location gamma. By cross-referencing property records from 1993, they identified 3 possibilities: an abandoned fire observation tower in the state forest, that's a former agricultural research station that had been converted to private property, and a communications relay station owned by surprisingly a subsidiary of Omnitech that had operated under a different name. The communications relay station, located on a remote hilltop accessible only by a dirt fire road, emerged as the most likely candidate. Satellite imagery showed it to be a small compound consisting of a central building surrounded by what appeared to be antenna arrays and satellite dishes, many of which had collapsed over the decades of abandonment. At first light on June 17th, a tactical team was dispatched to secure the location while investigators prepared to examine what they hoped would be the actual site of whatever had happened to Reid and Keller. The relay station was even more isolated than the satellite imagery had suggested. Surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, with a steep drop-off on the 4th, it commanded a view of the valley below while remaining virtually invisible from ground level. The access road had been reclaimed by nature, requiring off-road vehicles for the final approach. The main building was a single-story concrete structure with few windows and a reinforced door that had been chained shut, but showed signs of previous forced entry likely from trespassers or scavengers over the years. Adjacent to it stood a generator housing and what looked like equipment sheds. The antenna arrays, once presumably cutting-edge technology, now resembled abstract sculptures as they tilted at various angles, their purpose no longer evident. When the tactical team breached the main entrance at 8:22 a.m., they found an interior that defied expectations. Unlike the abandoned Omnitech facility, this building had been methodically stripped. Walls had been removed down to the support beams in some areas. Flooring had been torn up, exposing the concrete foundation. Wiring had been ripped from conduits. Someone didn't want anyone to know what was in here, observed the tactical team leader. Despite the comprehensive attempt to remove all evidence, the team's search revealed subtle clues. Old patterns in the floor indicated where heavy equipment had once been anchored. Wall markings showed where cabinets or control panels had been mounted. And in what appeared to have been the central room of the facility, a large circular pattern was etched into the concrete floor, approximately 15 feet in diameter. When Powell arrived an hour later, accompanied by Keating and the first wave of forensic specialists, her attention was immediately drawn to that circular pattern. "This matches the diagrams in the files," she said, kneeling to examine the etching. "I think this is where they positioned the device, whatever it was." As the forensic team began their methodical documentation of the site, Powell explored the remainder of the building. In what had likely been an office or control room, she found a small ventilation grate that had been overlooked during the stripping of the facility. Behind it, wedged as if deliberately hidden, was a small data storage device, an external hard drive that would have been cutting-edge technology in the early 1990s. By midday, the hard drive had been secured and transported back to the command post for analysis by the FBI's technical specialists. The decryption would take time, but its very existence suggested that someone had intentionally preserved some record of what had occurred at the relay station. Meanwhile, the forensic team made another significant discovery. Using specialized equipment to detect residual radiation or unusual energy signatures, a precaution given the unknown nature of the experiments, they detected an anomaly centered on the circular pattern in the main room. "It's not radiation in the conventional sense," explained Dr. Elise Jameson, the lead scientific consultant brought in by the FBI. "It's more like a persistent electromagnetic distortion. Whatever was operating here left a kind of shadow in the ambient electromagnetic field." "Is it dangerous?" Keating asked. "No, it's extremely weak now. But the pattern suggests it was once incredibly powerful, far beyond anything that should have been operating at a civilian facility, even a defense contractor's research site." As the day progressed, the investigation at both the Omnitech facility and the relay station yielded more pieces of a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with each discovery. Among the most significant findings was a partial list of personnel associated with Project Threshold, found in one of the buried containers. The list included scientists, security personnel, and administrators, many with backgrounds in advanced physics, neuroscience, and what was described as non-conventional communications research. At the top of the list was a name that would become central to the investigation: Dr. Alexander Weiss, identified as project lead and presumably the author of the journal. According to the limited biographical information included, That Weiss had been recruited from a prestigious research university in 1985 and had overseen all aspects of Project Threshold from its inception. A background check revealed that Alexander Weiss had officially died in a boating accident in March 1994, just weeks after the final entry in the journal. His body had never been recovered. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. But by evening, the FBI had established a dedicated task force to locate and interview any surviving individuals connected to Project Threshold. Most had similarly vanished, changing names, moving abroad, or in several cases, dying under circumstances that now appeared suspicious in retrospect. And the break that investigators desperately needed came from an unexpected source. Madison Wilson, formerly Madison Keller, approached Powell as she was returning to the command post after her second inspection of the relay station. "Officer Powell, I found something in my mother's belongings that I think you should see." Madison explained that after her mother's disappearance, she had inherited a storage unit containing Valerie Keller's personal items. Most had been catalogued by the original investigators, but in 2018, while preparing to finally clear out the unit, Madison had discovered a hidden compartment in her mother's old jewelry box. Inside had been a small key and a handwritten note, "Safe Deposit Box 473, First National Bank of Millbrook, in case of emergency." "I never followed up on it," Madison admitted. "It was 25 years after she disappeared, and I'd made peace with not knowing, or thought I had. But with everything that's happening now..." Within the hour, Powell and Madison were at First National Bank, where management confirmed that Box 473 was indeed registered to Valerie Keller and had remained untouched since 1993. The annual fees had been automatically deducted from a special account. Keller had established an account with just enough funds to maintain the box for 50 years. The contents of the safe deposit box consisted of a single sealed envelope marked "Insurance" in Valerie Keller's handwriting. Inside was a micro-cassette tape of the type used in portable recorders in the early 1990s, labeled with a date, at 10/1993, 4 days before Keller and Reid disappeared. Finding a device capable of playing the decades-old tape format took several hours, but by 9:30 p.m. Powell, Keating, Madison Wilson, and a small group of key investigators gathered in the command post to listen to what Valerie Keller had recorded shortly before her disappearance. The tape began with static, then Keller's voice, tense but controlled. "This is Officer Valerie Keller, badge number 4731, or Millbrook Police Department. Today's date is October 19th, 1993. I'm recording this as insurance in case something happens to me or my partner, Thomas Reid." There was a pause, the sound of a door closing. Then Keller continued, "For the past 3 weeks, Tom and I have noticed a blue van following our patrol car during night shifts. At first we thought it might be coincidence, but the pattern is too consistent. Last night, we managed to get a partial plate number, JRAK 74, though we couldn't see the final digit." Another pause, papers shuffling. "We reported this to Sergeant Phillips, but without more to go on, there's not much the department can do. Tom suggested we try to intercept the van ourselves next time we spot it, get a better look at the occupants. But here's where it gets strange. This morning I received a phone call at home from someone claiming to be with the FBI. He knew about the van, knew we'd been trying to identify it. Said the vehicle was part of an ongoing federal investigation and we should stand down. When I asked for verification for a case number or a supervisor I could call, he hung up. I tried calling the FBI field office afterward. They had no record of anyone contacting the Millbrook PD about any ongoing investigation in our jurisdiction." Keller's voice lowered, as if she was concerned about being overheard. "Then 2 hours ago I found this envelope on the front seat of my personal vehicle, which was locked and parked in my driveway. The sound of paper being unfolded came through the tape. It contains a photograph of me picking up my daughter from school yesterday, taken from a distance. On the back is written, 'Some questions are better left unasked. Walk away.' There's no signature, no identifying marks. I haven't shown this to Tom yet. He's engaged, has his whole future ahead of him. But I have decided I'm going to document everything." If you are hearing this tape, it means something has happened, and I wasn't just being paranoid. The recording continued with Keller describing additional details, how the van typically appeared during the quietest hours of their shift, always maintaining the same distance, never approaching too closely. Now she'd noticed unusual clicking sounds on her home phone line, suggesting it might be tapped. How she'd observed a man in a dark sedan parked across from the police station on 3 separate occasions, apparently watching officers come and go. Then came the detail that connected directly to what they'd discovered at the Omnitech facility last week night. Tom and I were dispatched to check on a report of trespassers at the old fire tower off Route 79. When we arrived, we found nothing suspicious at the tower itself, but on our way back, we noticed lights on a hilltop that shouldn't have had any active structures. We decided to investigate and found a dirt road leading up to some kind of communications facility. There were vehicles parked outside, including a blue van matching the one that's been following us. Before we could get closer, a security guard approached. He claimed it was private property, a relay station for the regional telecommunications network, and asked us to leave. Something about his explanation didn't sit right, but we had no grounds to push further without a warrant. That night was the first time we received a direct warning. Someone called the station, asked for me by name, and said only officers who ask too many questions about the relay station tend to regret it. Then they hung up. The final portion of the recording was made, according to Keller's narration, on the morning of October 19th, the same day she created the tape. This morning I contacted an old colleague from Philadelphia, now with state police. Asked him to run a discreet check on that relay station. He just called back. According to official records, the facility is owned by Northeastern Communications Group, a subsidiary of something called Omnitech Industries. But here's the thing. The property doesn't appear on any utility grids. No power lines, no water, no registered generator permits. But according to all official documentation, it's a non-operational, unmanned relay point. So why were there at least 6 vehicles there last week? Why are there lights on at night? And why would anyone warn us to stay away from an abandoned communication station? Keller's voice became more urgent. Tom and I have decided to go back. Not officially, we are not logging it, not radioing it in. We are going to drive by during our shift tomorrow night. See if we can observe from a distance without being spotted. Just gather enough information to justify a formal investigation. If you are listening to this, it means something went wrong. It means we found something we weren't supposed to find. Look into Omnitech Industries. Look into the relay station on Miller's Ridge off Route 79. And watch for the blue van, license plate beginning JAR K74. The tape ended with Keller's final words, "I have got a bad feeling about this, but I can't walk away. Not with those people watching my daughter. Whatever they are hiding, it's worth finding out. Just if something happens to me, please tell Madison I love her more than anything in this world." The recording ended, leaving a profound silence in the command post. Madison Wilson wiped tears from her eyes. Lieutenant Keating stared at the wall map where they had marked the location of the relay station, the very facility they had secured that morning. "They went back on the 20th, not the night they disappeared," Powell said finally, breaking the silence. "They did a reconnaissance, probably confirmed their suspicions, and then decided to make an official approach on the 23rd, Keating continued. "That's why Reid used the gas station phone. He was calling someone about what they'd discovered, maybe trying to get backup. The tape provided a critical missing piece, the reason Reid and Keller had driven so far from their patrol route on the night they vanished. They hadn't been lured or tricked. They had been investigating something suspicious, something connected to the relay station and Omnitech Industries. But it still didn't explain what had happened to them after they parked on Rosemont Drive. It didn't explain the strange blue light captured in the Polaroid photograph or Eleanor Winter's observation. And it didn't reveal the true nature of Project Threshold or the transition referenced in the files. Those answers began to emerge the following day, when the FBI's technical team successfully accessed the data on the external hard drive found hidden at the relay station. The drive contained video files, technical specifications, and a comprehensive log of trial attempts dating from 1988 to 1993. That most of the technical documentation was heavily encrypted, but several video files were immediately accessible. The first showed a laboratory setting with equipment arranged around a circular platform similar to the etched pattern found at the relay station. Scientists in white coats adjusted settings on control panels, while a single subject, a rhesus monkey, sat in a restraint chair at the center of the platform. A voice off camera counted down, initiating trial 1 in 3, 2, 1, and a blue light, identical to that seen in the Polaroid of Reid and Keller, emanated from devices positioned around the platform. And the light intensified, enveloping the monkey, which showed signs of distress before the video abruptly ended. Subsequent videos documented what appeared to be a progression of experiments. Later trials used different animals, then human volunteers identified only by number. In each case, the same blue light phenomenon occurred, with varying results, many of which were difficult to interpret without the accompanying technical data. The final video file was dated October 23, 1993, the night Reid and Keller disappeared. The footage began with an exterior shot of the relay station at night. A police patrol car was visible at a distance, headlights off, parked just off the access road. Two figures recognizable as Reid and Keller approached the facility on foot, flashlights in hand, moving cautiously. The scene cut to an interior camera showing the main room with the circular platform. Several individuals in lab coats monitored equipment, while two men in dark clothing matching Frank Novak's description of the van's occupants stood near the entrance, speaking into radios. One of the scientists, an older man with gray hair, whom Powell immediately recognized from photographs as Dr. Alexander Weiss, addressed the group. They are approaching the east entrance. Security team ready. The men in dark clothing nodded, moving to positions flanking the door. Remember, we need them both on the platform for synchronized transition. No deviations from protocol. What happened next occurred with military precision. As Reid and Keller entered the building, they were immediately confronted by the security team. Words were exchanged inaudible on the surveillance footage, and both officers reached for their weapons. Before they could draw, a third security member, previously unseen, deployed what looked like a taser from behind. Both officers collapsed, incapacitated but conscious. The security team quickly moved Reid and Keller to the circular platform, restraining them in chairs positioned at precise points within the circle. Dr. Weiss approached, injecting each with something from a syringe. Sedative to minimize neural disruption during transition, he explained to someone off camera. They will remain conscious but compliant. The camera angle changed, showing Reid and Keller from above. Both appeared dazed but aware of their surroundings. Reid's mouth moved, forming words that might have been questions or protests. Keller's eyes darted around the room, taking in the equipment and personnel. Dr. Weiss stood at a control console addressing his team. Trial 7, full spectrum transition attempt. Primary and secondary subjects prepared. Field stabilization at optimal levels. Initiate threshold sequence on my mark. He turned to look directly at Reid and Keller. You should feel honored. You are about to make history, even if no one will ever know it. And the countdown began. The blue light emerged from emitters positioned around the platform, growing in intensity until it formed a dome of energy encompassing both officers. Their expressions shifted from confusion to alarm as the light intensified. And then, at the moment of peak luminosity, something extraordinary happened. The light collapsed inward, concentrating around Reid and Keller like a cocoon. For a split second, both officers appeared to flicker, as if they were images on a faulty screen. Then the light vanished. The platform was empty. Both Reid and Keller were gone. The laboratory erupted in what appeared to be celebration. Scientists embraced each other. Dr. Weiss raised his arms triumphantly. The complete transition achieved. Vitals still registering on the other side. We have done it. 1. The video continued for several more minutes, showing the team packing essential equipment and data storage devices while security personnel began dismantling larger components. Doctor, this all, Donays. Weiss gave explicit instructions about removing all evidence of their work from the facility and transferring key components to Site Omega for the next phase. The final segment showed the security team driving Reid and Keller's patrol car, following a predetermined route back to Millbrook with the blue van trailing behind. The car was parked on Rosemont Drive, locked from inside using a specialized tool, and the team departed, leaving behind a perfectly staged disappearance scene. The video ended with Dr. Weiss speaking directly to the camera in what appeared to be a private office, October 23, 1993. Project Threshold has achieved its primary objective. Full human transition has been successfully executed and maintained. Subjects Reid and Keller remain viable, according to remote monitoring. The next phase, extended maintenance and eventual retrieval, can now begin. All evidence of Phase 1 operations will be secured or eliminated as per Protocol 17. His final words sent a chill through everyone watching. For the record, I regret the necessity of using unwilling subjects. But after 6 failed attempts with volunteers, we determined that the psychological profile of law enforcement officers, their alertness, their trained responses to stress and danger, provided optimal neural patterns for successful transition. Reid and Keller were not chosen randomly. They were chosen because their specific characteristics gave them the highest probability of survival. As the video ended, the command post fell silent. The implications were staggering, almost beyond comprehension. But one question dominated all others: what was transition, and where had Reid and Keller been transitioned to? Partial answers emerged over the following days as the FBI's cryptanalysis team broke through layers of encryption on the hard drive's technical files. What they discovered was so sensitive that the investigation was immediately classified at the highest levels, with information compartmentalized even within the task force. According to the decrypted files, Project Threshold had been established to explore theories of quantum displacement, essentially the controlled movement of matter from one point in space to another without traversing the distance between, in layman's terms, teleportation. But the project had evolved beyond its original parameters. Escalation. By 1990, researchers had discovered that their apparatus wasn't merely moving subjects through space, it was moving them through what the documents described as parallel dimensional states. The theoretical physics involved was beyond the comprehension of most investigators, but the practical implications were clear. Omnitech, operating under classified defense contracts, to develop technology capable of transferring living beings into what could only be described as an alternate reality, a parallel universe, with different physical properties but that capable of sustaining human life. The trials documented in the files were increasingly successful attempts to perform this transition, maintain the subject's vital functions in their new environment, and eventually retrieve them. Animals and volunteer human subjects in early trials had either failed to transition completely or had not survived the process. Reid and Keller represented the project's first fully successful human transition. According to monitoring data included in the files, both had survived the process and remained viable in this alternate state for at least 120 days, the last date for which data was available on the recovered drive. The most disturbing aspect of the files was the revelation that Project Threshold had never been officially sanctioned, even within the classified world of defense research. Dr. Weiss and his core team had originally been contracted to explore theoretical applications of quantum physics for secure communications. Their discovery of the threshold effect had led them to secretly redirect resources and funding toward their own agenda, operating without oversight or ethical constraints. When their unauthorized research was discovered by certain elements within the defense establishment in early 1994, the project was officially terminated. However, rather than face consequences, Dr. Weiss and his inner circle had apparently enacted Protocol 17. The systematic elimination of evidence, the reassignment of key personnel, and the preservation of critical data and equipment for future resumption of the project. The reference to Site Omega suggested they had planned to continue their work elsewhere, beyond the reach of conventional oversight. The fact that most key personnel had subsequently disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances indicated a comprehensive cover-up. But the central question remained unanswered. What had happened to Thomas Reid and Valerie Keller after their transition? Were they still alive in this alternate reality? Was retrieval possible? And perhaps most importantly, had Weiss and his team continued their experiments elsewhere, with other unwilling subjects? On June 25, 2024, 9 days into the investigation, a significant development occurred that would provide answers to at least some of these questions. A package was delivered to the Millbrook Police Department, addressed specifically to the investigators of the Reid-Keller case. It had been mailed from Seattle 3 days earlier, shortly after the first news reports about the excavation of the Omnitech facility. Inside was a letter and a small device resembling a sophisticated flash drive. The letter was signed Dr. Elijah Morris, former Project Threshold monitoring lead. Morris, according to the Project Threshold personnel list, had been responsible for tracking the vital signs and neural patterns of transition subjects. He was one of the few team members whose whereabouts after 1994 had not yet been determined by the FBI's task force. His letter explained that he had been living under an assumed identity since the project's termination, initially out of fear of retribution from Dr. Weiss and his security team, later out of shame for his participation. The recent news about the investigation had prompted him to finally come forward with what he knew. According to Morris, Project Threshold had indeed continued at a new location, an isolated facility in northern Alaska, operating under the cover of atmospheric research. There, Weiss and a reduced team had refined their technology and continued monitoring Reid and Keller until 1997, when something unexpected occurred. The subjects initiated self-retrieval, Morris wrote. We never believed this was possible, but somehow. They found a way to reverse the transition process from their side. Our monitoring equipment detected the energy signature of a threshold event, originating from the parallel status signature, matching our retrieval protocol, but not initiated by our equipment. The retrieval had been only partially successful. According to Morris, Reid and Keller had indeed returned to our reality, but not to the same location or time from which they had departed. Based on the limited data captured during this event, Morris believed they had emerged somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, approximately 2 years after their disappearance. By the time we identified the retrieval location, they were gone, Morris wrote. Dr. Weiss was frantic to recapture them, not only to continue the research but to prevent exposure of the project. And the security team tracked them for several months, but Reid and Keller had obviously learned how to disappear effectively. The flash drive accompanying the letter contained monitoring data from the entire period Reid and Keller had been in the alternate reality, including records of their vital signs, neural patterns, and what Morris described as environmental interaction markers. It also contained a partial record of the retrieval event and subsequent search efforts. Most significantly, it included a final notation dated May 2002, search terminated by order of Dr. Weiss. Subjects presumed integrated into civilian population under assumed identities. The Project Threshold entering final shutdown and data preservation phase. This revelation transformed the investigation yet again. If Morris's information was accurate, Thomas Reid and Valerie Keller hadn't just disappeared, they had been unwilling subjects in an unauthorized experiment, had spent nearly 4 years in an alternate reality, somehow engineered their own return, and then deliberately vanished to escape their captors, which meant they might still be alive. The FBI immediately launched an operation to locate Dr. Morris in Seattle, both to verify his account and to ensure his safety. Simultaneously, a specialized team began analyzing the data on the flash drive, focusing particularly on the retrieval event coordinates to determine exactly where Reid and Keller might have re-entered our world. On June 30, 2024, Dr. Morris was found dead in his Seattle apartment, an apparent suicide according to local authorities. A note on his computer read simply, "I have said what needed to be said." The rest is in the data. May they find peace. The timing was suspicious enough that the FBI ordered a full forensic investigation, but preliminary findings suggested Morris had indeed taken his own life, perhaps out of remorse, and perhaps out of fear of what might follow his disclosure. The data analysis team, meanwhile, had pinpointed the probable retrieval location, a remote area of forest near the Oregon-Washington border. The exact spot corresponded to what appeared to be a natural energy anomaly, a localized geomagnetic disturbance that Morris's notes suggested had somehow facilitated the officers' self-initiated return. When investigators reached the site on July 2nd, they found nothing immediately significant, just a small clearing in the forest with no obvious signs of disturbance or human activity. Ground-penetrating radar and specialized sensors detected residual energy patterns similar to those at the relay station, but much weaker, faded by time. What they did find, buried beneath a distinctive rock formation at the edge of the clearing, was a waterproof container holding two items: Officer Valerie Keller's police badge, a second badge, not the one found in 1994, and Thomas Reid's notebook, the same one that had been in the patrol car the night they disappeared, now filled with additional entries. The notebook contained a detailed account of their